you.
Good afternoon. I was about to say good morning because so used to the morning time and not an afternoon session. So welcome everyone. We're going to give it just maybe 2 more minutes before we start. I have lots of content to share with you, but really more of an interactive facilitative workshop. So I want to warn you, I'm not going to be the one just talking. So be ready to share. And so while we're waiting for everyone, I'll just quickly kind of go over like the format of this humanizing workshop. Hence the title, Humanizing Education Workshop. Hi, Michelle, glad to see you. Hello, everyone. But the humanizing workshop, this is very much about being a human in this space, which I shouldn't have to ask anyone, but it seems to be something that we need to remember. I'm a human being. So I may be flawed, I may make a mistake through this facilitation, but we keep flowing. So I'm going to ask you later on, one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to do a self-eval, and you're going to break out into a breakout group and discuss that among each other on how you're feeling in the space that you are in. Welcome everyone, Humanizing Education Workshop. I want this to be a very, very transparent space for us to talk about humanizing education. And oftentimes it's not it seems so simple, but it's so complex. One of the things in this workshop is that we're going to learn about the origins. And if you already know the origins of education, please chime in. We'll do a brief view. We'll talk a little bit about implicit racism. We'll talk a little bit about race policies. We will get into the humanizing aspect of connectedness and belonging and empathy. We'll go over emotional intelligence, which has everything to do with empathy and connectedness. We also will dive into a little bit of Carl Rogers and Maslow, who both are pioneers and psychologists in humanistic theory. And we will also do some practice in our workshops, if we were able to, because I can tell you on Tuesday, I did this same training, and Tuesday it was such a dynamic conversation with the students that we didn't even get through the whole presentation, which is quite all right, because it's a humanizing workshop. So with that being said, I'd like to start. So this slide that you see behind you, just to humanize, thank you who came in. Ray, welcome. What do you see behind you? Does anybody want to put in the chat where that picture is from? Just take a guess. Or you can speak up. Renee is saying beautiful beach, Cabo. Anybody else? All right, it's Cannon Beach in Portland, Oregon. And that picture is of me and my friends on the very last day that we were there. And it was in the morning. It's about 2 years ago, right when we started the pandemic. And I'm sharing this with you first off because to set the tone of humanizing. I like to hike, and this is who I refer to as my crew. I know you have a crew. If there's faculty and staff here, I know you have a crew. You may have a crew at work. You may have a crew that you have that's personal and is your family. You may have your family crew, and you may have your friends crew. But this is my crew that I refer to as also my family and my friends. And on this day, I would say that I took a walk down the beach in the morning. And we all kind of came together, not realizing that each of us was taking our individual walk down this beach, and then joined each other and just took a breath of like, oh, this is so beautiful. And I want to step back and share with you, like originally I wasn't going to go on this hiking trip because I just came from transitioning my grandmother in Illinois, and I live in San Diego, California. My family lives in Illinois. And my grandmother transitioning from her apartment to a nursing home during pandemic. So it was very much a very intense time for me, I would have to say, in seeing that my grandmother no longer could take care of herself. And as well as me being the one that had to step up and take on that responsibility to ease my mom's pain and her feelings. So with that being said, welcome to Humanizing Education. And hello, I'm Toni Salter. I'm here because I believe in you. I'm here because I believe in the infant hope of humanity. And what I mean by that is I believe in us first. I believe when I make decisions and when I design professional development like this, that I am thinking about the person. I believe when I'm deciding on how to do a process or participate on state committees that have to do with policy, I'm bringing in the humanity and then deciding if that practice and policy, I'm asking the questions, does that impact people? And if it impacts all people, is that going to create a barrier for them later on, systemic and institutionally? Those are the questions and those are the things that are on my mind when I'm in my position that I am designing statewide professional development, but also in positions or committees when I'm sitting on. And although there may be practices and policies that are the way they are, I no longer accept that. Because if they are the way they are and they're impacting humanity of others, I want to have a discussion about that and see how maybe we can relook that way and put the humanizing back into those practices and policies that were originated maybe intentionally or unintentionally omitting some humanity of others. The tone of this workshop really is about humanizing, which is why I shared a little vulnerability of what I was going through behind that very first slide and how important it was that I had my crew surrounded by me. And it was so beautiful. So I'm going to ask you, where are you right now? In this space, the virtual space. I'm going to ask you, how do I keep you connected and engaged? Hold on to those questions. And if you want to respond right now, please do so. Today's outcomes, our educational outcomes are, you see, educator and student. If it's an educator and student, is really to identify some key aspects that connect you together. It's allowing educators to self-assess their practices. I had earlier mentioned that, and thinking in terms of humanizing. It's also a way for both student and educator to really actively pursue, what does mutual humanization mean? Educator and student, student and educator. And I know that I want to give tops to this pandemic, especially to educators, that you probably searched deeply more than ever when you had to put technology, put education in this virtual space. And that was a lot of reflection. And how do I bring myself into a virtual space when I really we can't tangibly be face to face? That's part of that mutual humanization. But the other aspect of that, and I'm not going to define that for you, but this is my perception as you go through this workshop, is that that's a mutual of how do I connect? That's why I asked you that question. How do I keep you engaged consistently throughout the process, where we are mutual, right? We're mutual in learning, we're mutual in the facilitation, where my growth is growing and so is yours. And then the educator and student using your power of I reflection, using I feel or I will change this practice or policy. I feel this policy doesn't reflect Black, Indigenous people of color. And so how do we work on that if that is the way you feel, and that going from I feel to I will statements? And then I want to ask you, I want to pause a second. What are your expected outcomes of this workshop? You registered, and thank you for being in this space, regardless if it's extra credit, regardless if I had a slot, I had some time in and I wanted to just see what this was about. What are your expected outcomes in this workshop? Please, anybody. Anyone? It's all right. Trust me, you will be talking in the next breakout session. So to be honest, how to humanize ourselves as educators. Thank you, Michelle. And am I pronouncing that correctly, Michelle? You can put in the chat, yes.
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, that was one of your anybody else? Assisting others with moving forward. Is that Elvia?
Yes.
Thank you.
Tonette, I agree with what Elvia wrote there, because I feel like, we're transitioning. We're at another point of transition in education. And I think a lot of us are confused as to what things will look like moving forward. And I mean, even in our spaces right now, some things are virtual, some things are face-to-face. When we're face-to-face, we have some people wearing masks, some people not. Like, we're in a state of a little bit of like disequilibrium, and which I'm not saying is a negative here. I think this is a perfect time for how do we humanize education, because as we're coming out of this, education's going to look different and be different. And so what does that mean if we have it be human-centered? And what does that look like? And so I think this training, what I'm hoping for as an outcome is that there's like some, opportunities for dialogue and reflection where people kind of think, like kind of learn, but then also say, who am I moving forward as an educator? And what am I doing to humanize my experience as an educator, or as a future educator, depending on who it is. And so, I don't know, that's what I've been thinking about a bit. And to me, that's kind of my personal objectives.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate you chiming in. I would agree. And same thing, I should ask what I feel that way too. Like, what am I going to be? It's not what, let me rephrase that. What I know being a human, let me not question in this space that we're in with all of you guys. You're going to teach me something. You're going to share something with me, and I'm going to walk away with being a little bit more in tune with you. So I want to restate that it's not, and that part of humanizing, like one of the things that we do is that, especially I think as an educator, we come in like, well, this is how it was, right? These are how we did things. This is the process. I come up with I do this. But how do you do that? Bringing your authentic self and bringing in the student's authenticity. So thank you for that. And welcome. I'm going to go back to this because I said, where are you right now and how do I keep you connected and engaged? And I want you to remember that, because we're actually going to go into a breakout session. And I think there's 11. So I think we could go into just 2 groups. It's a real quick breakout session. And let me go over the breakout session culture for you guys. We have about 3 breakouts, and I certainly hope that we can get through those today. No, it's not towards you guys. It's just that the conversation gets very engaging along the way to this workshop. So the workshops will range from 8 to 20 minutes. And really the breakout sessions is to allow you to community building and support. First thing in humanizing, right? If I know this off top, that this is one of the expectations to do in a breakout session in the virtual space, that kind of sets the tone and made me relax a bit. It's sharing your diverse viewpoints and contexts and skills. whether you're a student, whether you're an educator, both together. And that's where that, to me, that transference of learning and that mutual humanization happens. And then taking that and practice applying that very concept that I just said of humanizing. And how you're going to practice that is that you'll look at a sample attendance policy. You'll take a look at a sample, whether it's attendance policy that you choose with your group, or you choose a sample, a sample course syllabus. And just looking at that to practice, what is it that, how you feel about it in terms of thinking about students, which is our, in state of California, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color. Does it need to be changed? Does it address their humanity? And if it does, what would you change? What would you work on in changing that? So that's the practice of applying concepts of humanizing. In your breakout sessions, just quickly introduce yourself if you know each other, and please, one spokesperson per group. Just capture the group's responses and then be ready to report out. It is me, and it's just me. I wish I could be in your breakout session, so I'm setting that tone, but I can't, just in case someone comes in, which is why I'm asking one person in the group captures the group responses. And then you can either use the Google slide that Renee will plop in for you to put your notes, or you're welcome to take your notes, just keeping it very simple, just as long as we have that interaction and dialogue back. So the first breakout session is really about community building and support, and then using a self-care rating scale. So I'm going to share with you this rating scale. And I do believe Renee will plop it in the chat that you'll have access in your breakout room. And it's really about, where are you at in this space right now? And it's a domain, different 8 domains. I really love this because it doesn't just say, well, I'm here. It allows you to kind of think about and reflect where you're at. Intellectually, interactional, emotional, nutritional, your sensual, your spiritual, physical, contextual. I'm asking that where you're at in the space that you're in right now, and share that with your breakout group. And what I'm asking is, once you guys go down, collectively, can you as a group say, I think at a group, we're probably at, a 4 or 5, the consensus. You don't necessarily have to add it all up, educators who are here, or those who want to add it all up. Just take a feel of what the consensus are of everyone.
Tonette, you do want us to start individually though, right? So individual and then to consensus, is that right?
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
Cool.
So basically, Tonette, at an intellectual today, I feel like I'm at a 5. Interactional, I'm at a 4. Emotional, I'm just at a 3. And nutritional, I'm at a 1. And I'm just basing that off of the fact that, again, didn't eat breakfast, haven't even had coffee. So sensual, I'm in touch with my feelings. And so I feel like I'm at a 4. Spiritual, I feel good. 4. Physical, I had a great workout at the gym. At this moment in this space, I'm just saying, just at this space, I feel a 5. And my environment right now is good and peaceful, and I'm at a 4. Does that, anybody have questions on how that works? No. All right, so I'm going to put you in your breakout. It's just 2 breakout rooms, and it just assigns automatically. And I actually will give you 5 minutes because I don't think it should take that long. See you in 5, you guys, or you folks, really.
the TV hosts got into a fist fight, who'd win? You better understand. You better know that. I don't know what the answer is on that, but can't now one of them with me. And I know that. I'm hood ready. You got back up, because I knocked the out. You heard, y'all. That's why you can't. Number one. If all the TV hosts got into a fist fight, who'd win?
Thank you, you guys. And we're back recording. Yes, Michelle, anytime you guys want to say something, just pop on and talk. This is Humanizing.
Yeah, I just liked when Elvia, I think I'm pronouncing your name right. She was, and like even Catalina, there was I didn't feel go much into depth how I was feeling exactly, but them humanizing to me, it really made me feel comfortable. And in my mind I was thinking, oh well, yeah, I do feel this way because this happened this day and so on. So yeah, thank you to everyone for being so vulnerable and open.
Yeah, and thank you so much. This is a wonderful exercise. You guys will get copies of this slide presentation that you can use and take what you need just to set the tone of the workshop, right? And we're going to be with each other for the next almost 2 hours. Yeah, 2 hours. So I wanted to make sure that we all feel like we're in this safe, vulnerable space, and to speak your mind, not just because of this exercise that we did, but the tone of the entire workshop that we're going through today. Okay, so thank you for that. We're going to watch a video on human rights, but before we watch that, I am going to launch a poll. So let me get the poll started, and it's called Human Rights. I'll give you guys about 2 minutes to complete it. We're just waiting for 3 more to respond if they can. Anybody else? Everybody participate? I do believe so. And thank you. I'm going to end the poll. Okay, we got all 6. And I'm going to share the results just off the top. Does anybody want to just kind of guess which one? I'll share results. Can you see the results, everybody? Just thumbs up if you can. Great. So this is the results of out of the responses, and everyone, it seems like freedom of expression and opinion and human rights can be taken away for this group. Nobody chose none of the above, or right to culture, art, and right to nationality. And 2 chose right to marry and have a family and right to property ownership. And I'm going to show this video, but there is such an important reason why human rights are so incredibly important in the work that we do and moving forward, and not just the work we do and just how we treat people with the Ukraine that's happening right now. So Watch with me, will you?
What are human rights? A question that sits at the heart of our work. Human rights are a set of basic standards that everyone needs to live a full life. They come from shared human values such as fairness, respect, dignity, and freedom. And they belong to every person in the world, without exception or discrimination. There are 30 articles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document that was created in 1948, just after the Second World War. The declaration was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly and is considered the modern founding document for human rights. These rights are indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated, which means that when one right is threatened, all rights are threatened. Knowing your human rights helps you protect them. To learn more about human rights, keep watching our Human Rights 101 series and share this video.
Okay. That was okay. What did you think of that? I'm moving on to the next.
What are human rights?
Excuse me, you
A
guys.
question that sits at the heart of
Forgive me, I'm gonna pause this share. Stop this share. So let's talk about that, the human rights. There's 31 articles. Did anybody know that? Not that it's wrong or right, but 31 articles of human rights, and it was in 1948. While I'm getting to my slide presentation, forgive me. No. Right. So let's take a look at what those human rights are in just a moment. Can you guys see my slide? Just tell me yes. Can you see it or no?
It's like presenter view. I don't see the full slide. I just see the little thing on the side.
Right, okay. Thank you. Only I would do this, so I'm having a human moment right now, so forgive me for that.
Tonette, this is a human moment right now because I forgot that I had it on gallery. So all of a sudden I can see Michelle and Catalina and Elvia and you, and like I feel like I'm hanging out with people, and that's really a nice feeling.
Well, I like that you share that. All right, now we're back on the swing of things. You can see my screen now in just a moment. Now, can you see the presentation, you guys? Thank you. Boy, I tell you, what a delay there.
what are human rights?
Here we go. So back to the human rights, and the choice was what? Which one we choose? The right to marry and have a family, right? And the right to property ownership, and that is not one of them. Neither is, you can't take away someone's human rights. Human rights cannot be taken away. There's a few that I just would like to focus on. And the reason why that I brought that up is because when we're an educator in our workplace, it is important that we do not discriminate. There's a reason why we have the human rights from 1948. All human beings are treated equal. That's the first one, are free and equal. No discrimination is number 2. And I'll give you a little bit more about number 2. Everyone is entitled to all kinds of rights and freedoms without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political, or other opinions, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. You have a right to education. All right, let's look at the right to education. Everyone has the right to education. Everyone shall be free. When I read that, what does it do for you? Everyone has a right to education. No discrimination. How does that impact education? Does anybody want to add to that?
I think when I hear that, it makes me think, you know, like all people of color, all people, even with disabilities and any differences that, you know, or like quote unquote differences, you know, just for everyone. And, you know, as educators, our job is to advocate for everyone. And I think it's really important that we know all these human rights.
Right. And do you think that and this, thank you for Michelle for adding to that, anybody else, but do you think that that was considered? Remember the year 1948. We're going to discover the origins, why are we learning about the origins of education? But keep that in mind, the human rights, you're absolutely right on spot. And that's humanizing, right? To think about that, that's keeping your humanity and also respecting the other's humanity. So let's talk about that. Speaking the truth about education, it's just a history of education and where the origins of education, were those human rights, some of those human rights considered without having the rights, 1948, just simple humanity. So here's a timeline of education, and in the 1600s, the first schools. The very first school was the Boston Latin School. And Harvard was the first higher education in 1636, to be exact. And then there was this, it's called the Old Deluder-Satan Act, but which really now is the Massachusetts law of 1647. And what that law was that every town that had at least 50 families hire a schoolmaster, a principal, right? Basically a principal, who would teach the town's children to read and write. And at the time, because the first school was a Latin grammar school that also went over positions in church and state, not so much the academic, right? The disciplines. Let's look at the 1700s timeline. When we look at the 1700s, curriculum started to take a role, and the first girls' school. Okay, 1600s to 1700s, that's a century before consideration of women. I mean, that and the humanity of women. We'll move into asylums and ordinance. And ordinance is really governments, right? And more law. So the 1800s was the Connecticut and Hartford deaf and dumb. They refer to those as asylums instead of schools. Later, they became schools. The Jim Crow law, which, does anybody know what the Jim Crow law is? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Segregation.
Basically, the Jim Crow law is segregation.
Let's go, let's go.
Don't need to say anything else more about it, just let it mean segregation. So that was in 1800s. So I'm going to step back. 1600s, the humanity of Black, Indigenous people of color, was that in there? Was that considered? 1700s, 1800s, sort of, kind of, there's a school, but segregated. And then in 1900s came the Smith-Hughes Act. That's basically career technical education now. That's changed. But originally it was created for an early vocational, but the philosophy behind it was to fit people into a track. It was a tracking mechanism for low income. So again, the humanity of a policy, right? That's a policy. Same thing with the Jim Crow, the humanity of a policy that was created. But during that time, the American Federation for Teachers, it's been around for a very long time, and that's helped to protect you. But at the same time that it was created, there's all of these other policies that were creating systemic barriers for those of color. 2000s, very much technology driven. We're very much into technology, and it's driven by that. There's student outcomes now, right? There are 911, school security. There's the internet. Then we have the No Child Left Behind and the Higher Education Act. Any questions about this piece? It's just a timeline, and there's many other pieces that we can talk about just to continue with the tone of humanizing and continue with the tone why it is so important that you bring your humanness and also your humanness is to question at times and not do the status quo sometimes. Because if we look at this, and I'm going to go to the next slide. Any questions before I move on? So let's talk about this. This is a timeline of American slavery, Black and African American slavery. Slavery was 246 years. If you look back at the origins of education, take a step away and look. Those individuals were not in school. They were not being educated because of the humanity. Then segregation, which is a Jim Crow aspect. So another 89 years. And then I put on this and I added this because it's not just about the humanity of Blacks. It's also the humanity of think about the Mexican War in 1848, which marks the end of the Mexican War, but handed 55% of Mexico territory to the United States. Did that have an impact on many, many individuals? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. In education, your ancestors, those who are here, and where they thought of in the origins of education in terms of the structure, in terms of where we're at. And then let's even think about it simultaneously during the 1600s all the way to the 1900s, the genocide wars against Native Americans. But yet, right now, and I will say the institutions are working very hard and funding very hard to close those equity gaps of the Black, Indigenous people of color. But it's important to understand that the humanity of those individuals, and why I'm saying humanizing, really elevating, humanizing the workshops, this workshop, is to ask that, while you're on your committees or while you're in your spaces or clubs, to think about the origins and think about the space you're in now. And one of the things that I had said was, when I'm on my committees and when I am in place, I ask the questions. I don't accept that's the way it is. Because I'm thinking about my humanity and thinking about your humanity. Going back to Jim Crow law, mandated racial segregation in all public facilities. And a little bit more about the genocide war. It systematically deprived Indians of their rights to life and basic political, economic, and cultural through killings. displacement, assimilation of being, if you're going to be a part of this, same thing with Blacks, part of America, that's assimilation. And even today, there's still all of this disparities. And then a little bit about the Guadalupe. United States believed it was their destiny to expand westward. I'm going to show a little current data of today. 87% of the state history education standards do not mention Native American history after 1900. What is that? That's curriculum, right? We think about the content and curriculum, but we also need to think about humanizing. How do we humanize that? I'm throwing rhetorical questions at you to start to think about that. And there's a curriculum development process, correct? Anybody on here, right? There's a curriculum development process. So even if you decide, hey, I want to make my content relevant, but maybe there's a question like, what is the process of our curriculum development? Does it take 6 or 12 months for me to even do that? And if that does, who do we need to talk to and bring in as part of the stakeholders? Like, can we look at this? Because most definitely that's impacting Black, Indigenous people of color. Because if the timeline is taking so long for me to, as a educator, I am trying to make every effort to connect and engage with them so that we can feel mutual humanization. But this timeline, because of this is just the way we do in our process, that's when you need to start asking questions. And sometimes when you do that, you're not so liked, right? You're isolated. So I'm gonna be, and why are you isolated? Isolating feels like you're devalued. That how are you feeling as devalued educator? And Renee, you have your hand up. Go for it.
I literally ran into this today, Tonette. I was talking with the college and we're looking at some course development and certificate and pathway development, you know, exactly what we should all be investing in as educators right now. And we realized that if we were able to get this course that, you know, they're talking about on the curriculum books for April, that there's only an April and May meeting. And they're off, which totally makes sense for June and July and return back in August. So we thought best case scenario, we get it on April. When will it actually run? Best case scenario, spring of 2023. So it's crazy that you're literally like, you're trying to be innovative, which should be at the forefront of all we're doing, student-centered, and yet our system literally works against us because there's pockets in the contract that the people are not contracted to do the work, which makes a huge difference. In addition, we know that the cycle, and also submitting it in April doesn't mean it will go through. It will, you have to submit in a window where you know it can get back to you, and then you can revise and resubmit by the next month. So even that, I mean, there's just holes. And I think a lot of us who are on right now have either dealt with it in the past or are dealing with it right now.
Renee, I appreciate that. And so, you know, our point of this workshop, like you're describing, when I just said that timeline and that process is not only impacting the students that are currently there, it's going to impact the students in the future. And what is it? I want to feel relevant. I want to feel like I can connect. I want to feel right. So there is a process that I'm describing that humanizing isn't looking at the humanity on how do we change that, because it's so focused on the process. You need process. There's no doubt about that. And this workshop is not saying that. This workshop is saying we need to reevaluate how we do stuff and continuously evaluate that. Because why? Because humans change. The next generation may have different needs. Anybody else want to chime in? This is a slide, current 2019 Census Bureau report. 70% of Hispanics in comparison to 93% non-Hispanics whites had a high school diploma or higher. Going back to just the origins and the treaty, I'm not using that as the only reason, right? But could this have been part of the reason why we still are, why Hispanics in high school are still, their percentage is lower in getting a high school diploma? And then when you look at 17.6% of Hispanics in comparison of 36.9% of non-Hispanics, and by the way, this is the state of California's data, whites had a bachelor's degree or higher. Again, this is a systemic. This is something that's caused by systemic. So to put into context, there's 15.5 million residents as of 2018 that are Hispanic. 2.5 million are Black African American, 700,000 are Indigenous, 5.8 million are Asian residents, 286 are Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, and 23.4 million is the white population. We're a very diverse state. But again, when we look at this and we look at the percentage of number of the white population, and we think about the systems and the origins that omitted the humanity of Hispanics, Black African American, Indigenous, that's something to think about when we look at our data. So we're just going to take a quick moment, just a quick little bit to just dive a little deeper into our discussion. And what was everyone's human rights considered in access? That's what I'm calling it, because that's what those are the words we use now, access and opportunities, and looking from the early origins of education. And if not, what may be reasons of exclusion? And if you feel like they were included, hey, let's talk about what are the reasons that they were included. Anyone? Please.
If I may, I'd like to respond to the group question.
Sure.
I don't believe that everyone's human rights were considered. And I believe that one of the reasons for that exclusion was the lack of respect for humans that did not look like the individuals that were developing these policies.
Thank you, Elvia. Thank you so much for that. Anybody else?
In other words, they were dehumanized.
Yes, they were dehumanized. You're absolutely right. Anybody else want to add to that?
So yeah, no, I believe the same thing, that you know, from the start, not everyone was included. I'm part of you know, the Latinx community, first generations. And so when I see that percentage of, you know, Latinos or Latinx people not having a high school diploma or not completing college, you know, it goes to show how this system or this institution wasn't created for people of color. It wasn't created for the Latinx communities, for the Black people. It was simply created for, you know, the white people, I guess you can say. And it's still, and you know, just those percentages, it goes to show how there still hasn't been any accommodations for us.
Michelle, thank you. And I want to just set the tone. Feel confident in speaking your truth here, this humanizing workshop, because it is the truth. It's not the people that right now, the educators, right? It's not necessarily that they may be doing that work, but it's so important if you are in your space, if you are a teacher and educator, to really know that, right? I'm not saying that I'm here to be like, your fault, right? That's not, we're not going to get anywhere with that in humanizing, because then what I'm doing is devaluing that being and saying that their fault. But what I am saying, to acknowledge the humanity, what you just did, and Elvia, is to acknowledge that there were people who were not a part of the entire system. So that is a system barrier. And at this point, we put a lot of resources toward the individual, right? The individual Michelle as a student, which is important. It's very important, the needs, but it is critically, and I'm going to say this, Percy, it is critically important to change the systems. Anybody else? We're just having a reflection.
I would love to just pick, I think it was Michelle that was speaking before. I just would love to piggyback off of that as someone who's also part of the Latinx community. It really is just shocking and saddening to see those numbers when we look at those kind of statistics. It shows that, you know, depending on your color, certain people are set up for success and certain people aren't. And you see that bleed into the rest of their lives. And I think that that's why it's extremely important to make those changes in education moving forward and make sure that the opportunities are available regardless of origin.
Well said. And is it Liana?
Yes.
Thank you. Well said. Well said. Anybody? It is strike. And I tell you that those two slides, and when you take down that timeline of education and where we're at, and you think about, wow, the systems really haven't changed a whole lot, right? The system, I'm not saying resources have changed, right? The resources have changed. So yeah, let's move on. Thank you for that deeper conversation, you guys. So when I asked you guys that, what were some of the reasons of exclusion? And it sounds like collectively, most of you felt like, yes, there was people excluded. So I want to explain a little bit, just touch on, but this is not a workshop that's about racism and anti-racism. That's tomorrow, which will be great with, I think, Lisa, who is a colleague, and she's fabulous if you're able to attend that. But this is just to kind of break down and give you just a little bit of understanding of what systemic and institutional and structural racism is, that is not, doesn't have anything to do with, and I'm going to touch on what Leanna said, when you look at those numbers. And oftentimes it feels like, and I'm going to speak for my culture when I was in school, it feels like I'm the problem when I step on the institution because of my life, right? Maybe because of because I'm low income. I too, Michelle, I'm a first generation graduate. I have a master's degree in psychology. Human, and my emphasis is on human performance and research. However, I'm also an only child. So we could break that down in so many different ways, because culturally, my culture would say, well, you were spoiled because you're an only child. But again, I am the first generation, and I understand. While I was going through school, I went to a private Catholic school. My parents sacrificed a lot because they felt like I really needed to have a very good structure, education structure. But while I was there sharing one of my experiences, when I was in first grade, I got my report card was all B's. But my advocate was my father, who kept everything. And this is how I learned to be, kept everything and said, wait a minute, sister, I will remember this very well. Sister Christina, this is not right. My daughter she scored perfect on everything in first grade. You need to change this, right? You need to change this. But that was what? A racism act towards me, right? As a kid. But please don't, I'm saying my experience, there is lots of those experiences from many, many people. Just recently, I was in the park with my dog. I'm going to use an example. And what was it? I don't know, last week. And a woman came up to me to talk to me about the Ukraine and asked me, did I think that this is exactly what she said. I'm so proud of Katanji, and I think she'll do well, but do you think she hurt herself by crying? She showed a sign of weakness. That this was a white woman. there were other people at the park with their dogs. That's a microaggression, right? Right there with me, wondering what I was going to say and what was my opinion. But moving forward, I'm using this example of the fact that systemic, hopefully you guys can see this. Still see my slide? Continuous discrimination that originated from racist principles and or practices. Can we say that can we agree that the origins of education, the systemic part, was built off of racist principles? When you omit other people of color because of their color, not because of their performance, right? We're not even talking about their performance. And then there's that institutional policies or behaviors that are intended or indirectly intended. And I added to this definition. So if you see this out, it doesn't say indirectly, but I feel like it's thinking about right now, it still indirectly happens and intend to discriminate against Black, Indigenous people of color, LGBTQ, and special populations. And I say special populations in terms of Perkins, and Perkins defines that as economically disadvantaged. It's not about people of color and what your race is. Students with disability, I think, Michelle, you mentioned that. So when Renee mentioned the curriculum, that's an institutional policy. It's not a systemic. When she talked about the process, that's an institution. I'm using that as an example. Attendance policy, that's an institutional policy, not a systemic. Anybody, do you want to chime in? I'll use an example. Absenteeism, right? That's a policy. And expulsion, a policy. And how many of you are aware that who is the percentage higher to be expelled from school in elementary? Does anybody know?
I know. Black boys, especially if you look at preschool.
They high percentage. I'm kind of thinking, I just want to add that. Maybe we should look at that expulsion policy, right? Because it can't possibly be all the Black male boys have issues in elementary. But again, the humanity of Blacks wasn't considered in that expulsion, or Hispanic, because Hispanic is right after Blacks in terms of the data of being expelled. And then structural. Structural are those cultural values in society, going back to, if you're in a meeting, right? I've been in committees, subcommittees, right? Well, that's just the way the process is, or the unions. That's just the way it is. And we're going to follow this. I'm not saying that every single thing needs to be changed, so I want to state that. But if it is causing a barrier for all the people that I just described, it is very difficult for them to get their authentic learning experience and education, then as a collective committee on curriculum development or the expulsion, maybe we need to look at that. Jody. Hi. Where's Jody had a question?
No, I was just going to make a comment that I did my undergraduate, my graduate program research on preschool expulsion based on article from 2011, the research from that. And at that time, children of color were expelled from preschools at a rate at more than the rate of all of the grades combined. And I heard about that and I found that so shocking that I actually did research on that, looking at teacher qualifications and preschool policies for what they had. And it was really, teacher education level versus and what the policies were in preschools. And it was pretty shocking. And that's what I just wanted to say.
Thank you, Jody, for sharing that. And thank you for writing your research on that. Now that's an ally. And that's someone who's thinking about the humanity of those kids and kids of color. Thank you so much for that. Anybody want to touch on this? Maybe you have an example, an experience of any one of these areas, it's called implicit racism. It's forms of implicit racism. Michelle?
Oh, yes, I wanted to share something. So I had an experience with, I believe during high school, my senior year in economics class and government class. I was sharing my, I was in the magnet program in which it was dominantly white and Asian people. So when I was sharing my, you know, my perspective on life and, you know, how it's hard being first generation and, you know, coming from an immigrant family and all, my teacher, once I shared what I had to share, my teacher was said, didn't know how to react. And so he was just like, okay, anyways, anyone else next? Kind of just like brushing it off. And it made me feel like, you know, I didn't matter, or he didn't even try to understand what I was where I was coming from or what I was trying to say.
I'm sorry for that, Michelle, and truly
you.
understand, but that's not the case, right? Truly understand, and I'm sorry for that. Anybody else want to share an experience?
Tonette, to me, that was an example of dehumanizing somebody.
Absolutely.
Many
It was
people
a
are in, and they're in positions where you can choose to humanize or dehumanize, and it's
Oh,
like an
yes.
active choice.
I like
I-
that you
What I
just said
mean.
that. It's being an active human, right?
Mhm.
An active human, and
I
not
think
sitting on the sidelines. Go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say with that story, Michelle, I think that sometimes people, rather than feeling you know, discomfort, they'd rather be dismissive. And so that was a perfect example of it. Like, he didn't want to try to see where you were coming from, but he'd rather just dismiss it and be like, okay, what's next? Who can change this atmosphere and make me feel a little bit more comfortable?
It definitely was. Good call. And you
Mhm.
know, part of this workshop, we're going to kind of touch on a little bit about empathy versus sympathy. And at that moment, he probably should have touched on his empathy, which are human emotions, right? That's another way of like humanizing as an educator, or no matter what level you get in life, administrator, leader, you should always be bringing your humanness. If you don't, then things like that happens to Michelle. And then Michelle, unfortunately, like, you have to pull from within yourself, right? To keep pushing on because you know you have an outcome. And that's just unnecessary energy. And say unnecessary energy to put on another person. If we can control it, what I mean by if we can control and maybe make your space and your navigation to wherever your journey is going in terms of education, then we should be doing that for each other. So I'm going to show you a couple numbers just really quick. This is open enrollment, most recent of 2021, that's dropped in the state of California. Part of it is pandemic. And so we were, K through 12 was at 6 million students, but now it's a little short of 6 million, put it that way. And then this is also by race and ethnicity. It kind of goes back to what I said, the state of California residents is 15.5 million in California, but this is who is enrolled. It's a predominant, we are a diverse and Hispanic Latinx culture because of the way you have to check off. That's who's in our institutions. This is a real quick look from the community college perspective. And this was 2019. This is skills gain. So going back to, I kind of talked about that Smith and Hughes Act and touched on that now is called career technical education or career education at community college level. And this means that they either got a certificate or earning towards. This is done by race. It's training or education. What do you notice here? Again, the numbers, the percentage. I don't want to get into the story because we're just a snapshot. The percentages are lower, but we don't know the story of disaggregating of why. But I can tell you a lot of times, and this is being very honest and from experience, We're trying to look at this differently, but in the past, when we looked at data, we assumed that it was a need that Tony was lacking, instead of looking at the story of the why, which I'm going back to the origins of education. Why aren't more students a representation in terms of race in career technical education? If there was an act, which is a policy which was designed for those to low income to track them, then that may be part of the reason why we've had centuries of why there's lack of representation by that race in, I'll use an example, in the healthcare field, right? In advanced manufacturing. Same thing with women, lack of women. We have this lack of women in various fields. Nursing, lack of males in nursing field. Why we always need to think about humans and the humanity of others, because later on, it may impact a whole different population and make us have these disparities from a societal perspective. We can stop and take a quick 8-minute break if you guys would like to do that. Or we can move forward into our breakout session. It's up to you. If you give me a thumbs up, move forward in the breakout session, we will continue. I saw Renee's thumb. Anybody else? Great. And now I said at the beginning, this is why it's such an engaging conversation that we continue on from the past workshop. So these are just some policies, you guys. It's not all policies, it's policies in education. And I even have contracts, because a syllabus is a contract between the student and the teacher. There's the board of trustees, right? Department chair evaluation. I have that on there because the chair and community college, who's the chair, they have so much, I guess they have the ability, a privilege to control the content and curriculum for a particular program. I have expulsion on there. School board members are locally elected, so they have the most control on which definition. The role of the school board is to be responsive of the values and beliefs of that community. We're going to go to a poll very quickly. And this is, oh, stop sharing. And sorry about that. I never shared the results. Bear with me. Next poll, it's called policies. Just really 1 minute. Would you agree that most policies created consider the humanity of everyone? Wow, Renee, I'm looking at this and I'm getting a little nervous here. Nobody's choosing yes, right? They're being honest.
I'm going to be honest. I'd love to know a breakdown of, like, I was looking at policies that you had on there, Tonette. I'd love to know a breakdown of how many chairs are people of color. I don't know. And maybe it is balanced and I don't know. In my experience, at least in my industry sector, I have not engaged in that many. So anyways, just made me think.
Well, that made me think about when I was
That's
doing
correct.
the same AB 86, and we had to work with chairs, right, to come together. And in my experience, no.
Jody,
so I'm going to end poll.
Jody just mentioned somebody in the chat who's a person of color.
Nice.
Yeah.
Going to end poll. I'm going to share the results. And this is collectively no, and sometimes. Wow. Oh, she says Santiago Canyon College chair is African American. That's wonderful. But it's also frightening that we had to think about that and have that conversation. No, frightening in terms of concern. So I'm going to stop sharing this one and go on to our why only race-conscious policies can fix higher education. Just a real quick.
Martin Luther King Jr. imagined a country where Black people could enjoy the full benefits of citizenship and sought policy aimed at righting the wrongs of racial injustice. It would take nearly a century after the end of slavery for the civil rights movement to translate into modern legislation, with the adoption of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Higher Education Act, and an executive order that encouraged affirmative action. But the trend toward race-conscious policies would be short-lived. Since 1978, the Supreme Court has ruled on 5 cases attempting to overturn affirmative action in higher ed. Fortunately, in every case, the Supreme Court determined that affirmative action is constitutional and that colleges are allowed to consider race so long as certain criteria are met. Still, there are several cases in the court system and other state laws that seek to end the use of race in higher education policy and practice. Currently, 8 states have bans on affirmative action. Every single one of these states saw declines in their enrollment of Black students at selected public colleges after the ban. In other words, race-conscious policies do work. In fact, the only thing that bans impede is forward progress. Because today, Black adults are less likely to have a college degree than white adults were in 1990, affecting an entire generation of Black citizens. So why do we need race-conscious policies for higher ed? Because colorblind substitutes for race, like income, alone don't work. Completion outcomes differ for white and Black students even within the same income group. Black folks from the highest income families default on their student loans at nearly 7 times the rate of their white peers. Household net worth of Black college graduates is less than white high school dropouts. Income-based solutions will not right the wrongs of racial injustice that keep Black students from accessing and succeeding in college. Here's what will. 1. Invest state and federal dollars in the places that are most likely to serve Black students: community colleges, historically Black colleges and universities, and minority-serving institutions, which have been traditionally underfunded. Second, hold institutions accountable for their racial climate on campus. That includes having a diverse faculty and curricula and how the institution responds to on-campus racial incidents. Next, bans on affirmative action must be removed and colleges should use holistic admissions that include race as a factor. Upholding affirmative action and race-conscious policies matter to every single institution that's committed to creating inclusive environments. Race-conscious policies are legal and beneficial, not just for college students themselves, but as they become future leaders who shape society for America as a whole.
Wow.
Martin.
That was, what did you guys think about that? Really quick, comments. True, Jody said. So up until now, we were talking about, and some of the language that some of you use, really dehumanizing, right? And to dehumanize someone is to devalue, and sometimes we overvalue, and they're judgmental reactions. So if you think in terms of devaluing is an emotional response. It is a response because, and I think Leanne was describing why the instructor in Michelle's case couldn't empathize. It was like devaluing her, and that was their response. Let's just move on. An overvaluing response of valuing something or someone too high. Does anybody have an example of most recent, in the past 2 years, of maybe an overvaluing response or in the world itself? Anyone?
Can I say something controversial?
You sure?
I think that, like, with our prior president, with President Trump, it was really fascinating to watch the American public kind of like grab onto certain tenets or things that he said, and then escalate the overvaluing to just like a us against them kind of like it created like a different culture mentality. So I mean, and I'm not, I don't want to have a critique on Trump because it depends who you are and your belief system on him. I know what I believe, but I also know what my mom believes, and I know that sometimes there's people that you can love who have different belief systems, right? And so, anyways, so that to me that was an example. I'm not sure if that's a proper one, Tonette, but that's the first thing I was thinking of.
We're okay. I feel like we're doing a humanizing workshop, so I'm going to say it was proper for the tone of where we're at. If we were doing an academic or an example over, but even when you start talking about overvaluing, devaluing, I think it's a great example, and I have to agree. That's what popped in my head, but also popped in my head is Putin and the followers again. Like, right? Not only is he devaluing, but then those who are okay with devaluing others, right? Humanity, they're overvaluing somebody else.
And he's on his horse. Remember that visual,
Right.
shirtless on the horse, kind of.
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that was the other thing that honestly popped in my head, is political in that way. And I also think that there's so much, like when we think about expulsion with the elementary kids, and when we had the responses, I remember seeing the responses over George Floyd, right? Some of the responses and the justification of why it happened also was, a lot of that was fallen in that response, right? Devaluing or overvaluing, but
That was
never over in
shocking to
this.
me, Tonette. I have to be honest, because I remember it was like horrific when it came out, and then all of a sudden it was like, but did you know this? And did you know that? And did you know his past? And did you know this? And did you? And it's like, hold up. Let's talk about that minute where he was unjustly killed. And then all of a sudden it was like people were trying to like sound that out. Or I don't know the right word, but you know what I mean? Like
No,
distract
I do.
everybody
I'm
from,
just, not to make this about that, I'm using that as a point. So I'm going to even go into education, because we've been in this the pandemic. We still are in it. I just want to add that we're still in it. But the first year we went through, but then the second year is like, oh, right. The word now is not being used, but it was learning loss. Oh, they've learning loss, right? How did we put so much emphasis on being in the physical space, right? The physical facility space of learning in a classroom. I'm not saying that because it depends on that person, that being, that instructor, all of that connection and belonging. But suddenly we were using a terminology, a deficit, I'm sorry to say it, a deficit way of, there's learning loss. Are you kidding me? If you were in the pandemic, I don't know about you, but I learned a lot about myself and what I could do and what I could take. And I think that we went straight there to put devalue and overvalue how you can learn and where you can learn. But when we think about value, I value that you guys are here with me today in this space. It's not a response. It's because I feel worthy. I feel you are worthy. I'm not coming in thinking about that you don't deserve to be respected. I'm not coming in thinking about the fact that you may not understand me today. I'm still thinking you're worthy and I respect you. Oh, George, sanitized language to make the situation more palatable and dismiss and minimalizing. Yes, Jody, absolutely. So policies and practices that might be successful overall could actually help one group of students while harming another. So should we think about humanity when we're evaluating those things that we are trying to benefit most? Of course, there's going to be some, but if it's one and then it really impacts, and if you think about what was said at the end of that human rights, if you violate one, you violate them all. For a person.
I want to add something, if I may, when there's an opportunity.
Go for it.
Okay, I wanted to make reference to something that came to mind. And thank you, Renee, for your sharing and your observation of the politics here. But one of my observations has been that it wasn't until most recently with our former president that I observed people suddenly taking interest in wanting to be part of a side. And I'm not so sure if it was because they felt a need to belong to a particular side. But by doing that, I also noticed that um, the the uh, the um, heightened violence towards one group or the other coming from each of these groups. And this was something that I had never seen before, where, even just listening both to both groups, there was just so much dehumanizing that was happening that it didn't make sense to me um, why some people felt they just needed to belong to one group or the other, and then engage in some behaviors that I don't think they would have otherwise engaged in, but because it was this large um, I don't know what to call this. It almost seemed like it made it okay to engage in those behaviors as long as you belong to a side.
Althea,
That's all.
thank you for sharing that. And we do as humans, I'm not agreeing with what the behavior was, want to belong, right? And we have a sense of wanting to belong, and we're going to touch on that too, a little bit about that. And I would say that the prior leadership that we had definitely made those who may have feeling the way they were feeling already, but it was probably hidden, but he made them feel okay to do that, to behave that way. Because that's not something that you suddenly decide to do because it's okay. It's definitely rooted deeper than all of a sudden a leadership. I mean, and we can even touch base back if we want to go into history of when we think about the genocide. I mean, we're focusing on Trump, but just think about the genocide. It took a leader, right? Leadership. When we think about America feeling like they wanted, you think about the treaty, because they wanted to have the West, right? That again, that's like overvaluing what America's needing. I'm just saying that response in that way. Slavery, right, was really about funding, but look how people were treated, right? That is devaluing. Ultimately, you shouldn't be going around devaluing people or thinking over. It's the same thing in our workspace, in a sense. There's a hierarchy in education, whether we want to be honest or not about it, a hierarchy that you just can't go in and go talk to your you should, even though it's open. But how many students go in and say, I want to have a conversation with the vice president of instruction? That doesn't happen. How many students can say, boy, I sure would like to meet the vice president of student services? That doesn't happen. I'm being honest, it's a hierarchy, right? Because we overvalue or somehow overvalue, still need those leadership positions, but why can't it be that I can feel like I just want to talk to them? I don't want to feel uncomfortable. Renee, go for it.
I had something happen last week it was in the K-12 system, but it was fascinating as an educator. So my kids are in high school, and they have been in high school during the pandemic. So this is the first time they had a face-to-face open house. What an opportunity to meet the teachers, to see the classrooms, to meet staff, and just get a better sense of like the school community. And so was really excited to meet the English teacher of my daughter, was in the classroom meeting the teacher for the first time face to face and talking to her. And in the middle of us talking, she goes, "Hold on a second." And I see her turn to the side as the superintendent and one of the board members comes in. I'm friends with both of them, of course. You know what I mean? So it's like, I'm like, oh, like Mike and Linda are here. Like, it's no biggie to me. You know what I mean? Because I work I'm lucky that I've been an administrator in my town. You know what I mean? Because there's a certain code. I don't realize that sometimes with teachers. And she goes, "Hold on." And she's like, "This is an emergency." She goes over to the superintendent and says, "Since you're here right now and I can talk to you, do you feel how hot this room is? There's no air conditioning at our school. It doesn't work yet. What are we going to do when it's 110 degrees and I've got 40, 15, and 16-year-olds in this room?" And as a parent, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe this is happening. My husband looked at me and goes, "Man, what a missed opportunity. Like what, like how sad that it took for the superintendent to do a walkthrough during your first open house at your new school. And that's the only time you feel like you can grab their ear." And I've known this superintendent for a very long time, at least a decade. And he's only been sup for maybe like the last, actually during the pandemic. So the last 2.5 years. Great guy. He's been in leadership for a long time. I know that she could call him, but she's one of his employees and has been for almost 30 years. Now, keep in mind, there's been other leaders. So there's the culture of leadership, but she felt like she couldn't call or reach out. And then can you even imagine though, your first interaction with parents, you have 1 hour to see 5 periods of parents. It's a massive amount of people. And to have to stop during that sacred time to troubleshoot an air conditioning issue, which is absolutely an issue because we live in 115-degree weather. In another month or two, it could be a health violation for students by all means, you know what I mean? Or lead to something that's more of a health concern, maybe not violation. Anyways, I just think it's kind of fascinating in the hierarchy where you feel like you can and can't say things. I know faculty who don't feel like they can talk to a VP, and the VP is not even the head of the whole campus. You know what I mean?
Right. I appreciate that example, and that's not feeling humanized. Like right? I mean, you can I respect the hierarchy, that's true. But I shouldn't feel like, or nor should whatever's going on, where I can't talk to that person. Right? There's a time and place to talk to people. So I want to say that. There is.
But a good leader should always be reachable.
Correct. I was going to say that.
Or approachable. Maybe the word is approachable.
It's approachable. So just a couple minutes, she could have said, "You know what, Renee, can you walk over here with me? I really want to discuss something with the superintendent." That would have changed the dynamics right there, right? Like right there. But it's just those simple things. But instead, Jeremy was right. A disconnect, right? Immediately a disconnect. Anybody else have an example to go on? And one of the things about Worthy, and I know you guys all know who Ketanji Jackson Brown is, so I'm going to use this as an example. When you're in live television and you are being questioned and treated the way that she has been being treated, we end up hustling for our own worth, Brene Brown. And how many times, and I know that there's some people here of color, that you have heard, we have to work twice as hard. I mean, I was told that as a kid from my parents. You have to be twice as good in the work that you do. And what does that do to our psyche? Just as an individual person, thinking that you have to work twice as hard. And when we look at that race conscious YouTube version, it said the outcomes are very different from white and blacks. Just to even with those who are college graduates, and I'm one of them, a college graduate that has student loan debt, still. And the way I see it, I feel like there's never going to be an end to it. But that's just my personal, Renee's like, no, there's never going to be an end to it.
And we can't go get a doctorate because
and I'm wanting my doctorate. It's a barrier. So, right, exactly. So that's a personal thing, but I'm just saying that I'm a part of that statistic that was shown, right? Like I have a graduate, and there's many others too. And it's because we end up hustling for our worth. Brene Brown. So breakout session number 2, just about 15 minutes. How many people do we have? I think there's 18, right? 18. So this breakout session is really to share, it's the goal of this session is to share your diverse viewpoints and contexts and skills. Going back to choose a policy. So I'm going to go back to start thinking just a policy. I'll go back here. Right there. There you go. Choose one of these, right? In your group, attendance. I'll say choose attendance. Let's just think about attendance policy. I'll make it easy. Attendance policy or syllabus. So again, your group, attendance policy or syllabus. In your breakout session, knowing devaluing, knowing overvalue. How might the policy be of value to BIPOC or LGBTQ students, plus faculty and staff? Those are my questions. How might the policy devalue? So we're thinking attendance policy or a syllabus contract. And how might the policy be overvalued? One person per group is the spokesperson. You can write your notes. You don't have to put your own notes. Capture your notes and then we'll report out. And before we go, I want to make sure that everybody understands the breakout session. So either you choose in your group an attendance policy, or you choose a course syllabus. And I think, Renee, did you drop in? Can you drop in the attendance policy? I can't hear you.
Just give me a moment. Sorry about that. I have not dropped it in yet. I will drop it in.
Thank you.
Just a moment.
Drop in the attendance and the course
The math
syllabus.
syllabus.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm letting them choose whichever one they want. And I asked 3 questions, but I'll even keep it simplified. Just look at this as like, how might the policy devalue Black, Indigenous people of color, LGBTQ?
Can I call one attention to one item too? As you're looking at the syllabus, also think of calendar and the impact calendar has on culture and like a personal culture.
Absolutely. So the question is, how might the policy devalue, and think about Black, Indigenous people of color, LGBTQ, and think about the calendar, right? How that may impact. You have, I know it says 2 to 15 minutes, but I want to make sure we get through this. So I'm going to cut it to just 10, if that's okay. Happy thinking about this, you guys. I'm going to, as soon as I get to the breakout rooms, and I'll put you back in the main session, or don't join, Renee.
Tonette, okay, we're moving, okay.
Welcome back. Can't wait to hear your responses.
It looks like they're closing in about 30 seconds.
Oh, still.
Yeah, so they're almost here. Yeah, they have 22 seconds.
I feel like that Zoom thing with the seconds, I feel like it's like 2 minutes. Doesn't seem like a minute.
You know what? I agree with you, except when I'm in the breakout room, you're like, oh my gosh, the time's going so fast.
And it's so true. In the breakout room,
together,
you're
everybody.
like, that's so true. I think it's just you're so excited on the opposite end to hear.
Totally.
Yes.
Like waiting for a piece of toast.
That sounds so good. I haven't had anything, so I would take a Skittle right now.
I am so sorry. I am sitting here literally.
Okay.
I have 2 Reese's peanut butter cups in front of me that I would be feeding you right now, my friend.
Oh my gosh, that just sounds so lovely right now. Sorry, guys. Oh, we got a visitor. So cute. Hey. So you guys, welcome back. So which group, there was group 1 and group 2, which group is going to go first to report out on what they discovered?
So my group, we chose the attendance policy, and we saw how certain aspects of it are kind of, devaluing for students. For example, we were talking about our experiences. Personally, I celebrate Dia de los Muertos in my Latinx community, my family, and that's something we're not excused from. So what do? Do I spend the time and the day with my family, or do I go to school? We also saw family situations. So for example, Catalina was saying how, weather conditions that we can't control, you never know, your home floods, and then you have no home, and all of a sudden you're homeless. So like, I feel like if you're in that situation early in the morning to go to school, your school isn't going to be the first thing on your mind. You're gonna be thinking about, well, my home is destroyed, I have nowhere to sleep, my bed is wet, all that type of stuff. And we were saying, I think this attendance policy is from a university. So we were saying, in, like, for example, K through 12 children and students, how there's some students don't have the ideal 2-parent home, so it's hard for them. And in general, even when you're in college, some students have to work to provide that extra money, the extra cash you need to have at home. And so you may not wake up on time to go to class because your body does not have energy, your body is tired. So yeah, and then overvaluing, kind of like we were going through that K to 12, we were really focusing on that. How, like, they're giving awards for students that have 100% attendance, but then again, what happens to those students that have those inconveniences, those not excused situations.
Wow. Well done, Michelle, and the whole group, you guys. That's awesome. Thank you for. Do you feel like you were looking at it from a humanizing lens?
Yeah,
yes,
definitely.
Most definitely. Difference. Thank you for that. And the other group. Who's the other group?
I was in group 2, and I could share a couple of points also off of the attendance policy. And just from my own experience, I think that it's very devaluing, and it really is dismissive of the individual needs that might affect people who are, Black, Indigenous, people of color. I think also, along with what Michelle said, it has to do with individual situations, and it doesn't really take into consideration what these people might be facing at home. A lot of times, at least in my experience in growing up, these children will have siblings that they have to take care of. They are in charge of going home and immediately, taking care of them. Or sometimes if the sibling is sick and a parent can't take the day off to, watch over that child that might be ill for the day, they'll have the sibling do it. Because they have to go and they have to work and they have to make money to provide for the family. And then a lot of that will fall onto those older siblings, which in turn will affect their attendance. Or I know in that attendance policy that was shared by Renee to the chat, it mentions, if you are over 10 minutes late to the class, you're going to be marked absent. Well, what if, that parent has to drop off this child at this school, this child at this school, because they might be in different age groups. And then that in turn causes them to be tardy. That will in turn be marked as an absent. That's counted against them, even though they did their best and they did everything in their ability to try to get to class on time. It says, and in high, it's, underlined and bolded in the attendance policy. It's the student's responsibility. But really, sometimes things outside of their control will affect them getting to that class.
Leanna, thank you so much for that. And again, you were looking at it from a humanizing perspective, right? And not just looking at, here's my attendant policy, here's the process, here's what's needed, this is how you're going to be successful, right? How the student is going to be successful. And that may be for a few, but you both just pointed out that the attendance policies should be fluid, should be flexible. And even though that was a university one, thank you for thinking about K through 12, because they're not flexible, right? There's a constraint, and it's not thinking about all of the students and the circumstances. I love, like, there's been so many disasters, right? If you think about nationally, and where families were forced to be homeless, where families were forced to be in shelter. I mean, the pandemic caused a disaster because many people lost their jobs, right? Their jobs there's no longer that position anymore. So then, and that impacts the students, therefore it impacts, and that's not in their control. That's another thing I'm going to use. That's a barrier that is not in that student's control. So when a student steps onto the institution, this is me going back to when I said, there's been a lot of focus on the student has these issues. They have these barriers. They have these needs, right? Their barriers is very different than the institution's barriers. The institutional barrier. Why can't we change the institutional barriers? Because yes, you can't control what their barriers that's going on in their lived experience. Thanks, Renee, go ahead.
Okay, I'm completely reframing things based on what you're saying right now. I'm like, oh my gosh, Tonette is totally right. They are our barriers as opposed to a student barrier or an institute. It's like, it's ours. Like, I think part of its ownership. I actually saw an opportunity, or not an opportunity, but I saw a shift with a school culture recently where a large portion of the kids have to take a city bus, and the school's kind of remote, and there's only one city bus that they can take. And so if anything happens to the bus, if there's an accident on the road and there's extra traffic, if there's like this, now one trip can end up having 75 students show up late to school. So because of the inconsistencies with where they live and the amount of times that the city bus was late to school, they took the penalty off of the children. And so from now on at that school site, they don't have tardies. The kids arrive when the kids arrive. And the one thing though with that, for all of our education systems, the schools get paid based on how many people attend class.
Not the time.
And so maybe that's something as systems we have to look at. Maybe there's like a set amount that schools get, and it's not completely based on ADA or FTEs, because that's where those rules come into place about tardies. And, you know, like a lot of that comes in based on funding and fear of losing funding. So if we could remove that fear and really cater to those individual campuses and those individual campus needs, there could be change.
I like that you are looking at it from that lens and that's what I mean. It's not their barrier. There's barriers that they have. It's ours in step on the institution. So I don't know yet what the solution is, right? Because you would have to, in order to look at what the solution, and you would constantly, here's where equity comes in. You constantly have to reevaluate that solution, because again, humans, I said at the beginning, it changes, right? Life changes. Things come up. Who would ever thought we would be in a pandemic because of a health disaster? And that's what it is. That's impacted every single being internationally. Michelle.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Leanna said about, being older siblings and, sometimes having to take care of your younger siblings. And so when that happens, and let's say you're tardied multiple, or you're tardied multiple times, then, it could be taken as, oh, well, you don't care about your education, and that's why you're always late. But no, it's because simply I have other responsibilities, and why can I not care about my family as well?
Wow, that's powerful. Thank you, Michelle. And that's absolutely right. And that goes to that devaluing the being based off of a tardy, right? Based off of tardy. And I'm going back to, you don't know the story. Remember I said the data? You don't know the story behind it. If we look at things or look at data, and that's what I was going to say, oftentimes data has been looked at from institutions as that there's an issue going on with the student, like the student's issue, instead of looking at the institution's issue. I'm going to move forward in case anybody else wants to chime in, because we've got 30 minutes. I told you this was going to be a wonderful, engaging conversation. So that really brings us into this focus of humanistic. Is knowledge and feeling a part of the learning process? These are just questions. Do we need to be in a positive emotional state to be our best selves? Has education lost some humane aspects? Leona said, we need to view the student as more than just a field chair. Yes, but we also need to view ourselves. Those who are educating also needs to view themselves as more than just teaching. Is to look at their humanity. Think about their lived experiences. I agree with that. So the why am I really honing in on humanizing? Because this is my definition combined with others. I'm not the only one. Education is important because it has a significant influence on a personal and social development and growth. Earlier in this workshop, I talked about it's important to me that we are engaged and we're connected, and that I keep you engaged and connected. Because why? Because it influences my personal and social development and growth, as well as yours. Emotion and learning are positively connected. That has been proven. How many are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? We are not going to do a huge study on this. We're not going to go into depth. I just wanted to bring this up because it's so important, and it is my something that I believe in. Not necessarily Maslow, but I believe in humanistic theory. And that means the whole being, focusing on the whole being. Maslow's hierarchy of needs was influenced, and was influenced by the Blackfoot Nation. So the Blackfoot Nation's on the other side of the hierarchy needs, and that was never meant to be a pyramid from the Blackfoot Nation. It's meant to be a community, a teepee. So both of these visuals is about actualization, self-actualization. Maslow's perspective of self-actualization is something that needed to be earned, whereas the Blackfoot Nation of actualization is innate. You don't need to be earned still points. It's something innate that we bring. Their community of actualization is the community, a place of belonging, create a place of belonging. When you look at Maslow, it's basically if your basic needs are not taken care of, your food, your water, then you're unable to go up to the next level, belongingness and love and needs. Again, I am not influencing one or the other. What I'm influencing is the importance of our needs as beings. And that does need to be, we need that. And for the sake of this workshop, it's because humanistic theory was brought out in the 1900s, which is Maslow, self-actualization, and Carl Rogers, which was basically about the being, person-centered theory. Humans are good at the core. These are the bullets. Education should focus on the whole being. The human knows their learning style, meaning that's true. My learning style changed from when I was a child, and it's very different than it is now. Approach engages feelings. This is an approach that engages feelings, your intellect, your self-esteem goals, practical and social skills. And how many are aware, 2 years ago, of social emotional learning that's supposed to be embedded into the classroom. So this is nothing new. It's about humanizing. So our engagement of feelings, when we think about our feelings, a little bit more about Carl Rogers, and I'm sorry I'm going through this because I want to make sure you'll be able to do the breakout session. He originally started out with client-centered, but it became person-centered theory. It's actualizing tendency, going back to Maslow, choices, your creativity. According to him, people we come in contact with nurture our growth by being genuine. Being genuine is being open with one's own feelings. And I certainly felt that today and feeling it today with all of you guys. And hopefully you are feeling that too. Dropping one's facial. Dropping your facades and being transparent and self-disclosing. So as an educator, if there's teachers here, yes, children need that, but that's why I keep going back to, you have to be able to do that too. If you're unable to drop the facades and be transparent in your classroom or wherever in the space that you are and self-disclosing, how can we expect that other being to do the same? And being genuine, and we're talking about feelings, isn't that our emotional intelligence? This is emotional intelligence, how we perceive our emotions. 5 areas of emotional intelligence. We perceive it, we understand, and this is not in a direction, I'm just saying it. We manage our emotions and use our emotions. So going back to, if we think about the origins, right? Or I'm going to use, sorry, Michelle, but I'm going to use, I hope that's okay. I'm going to use the example of when you were sharing something, an instructor. His emotional intelligence, he was using his perceiving emotions, but he wasn't really managing it or using his emotions to understand the emotion. And so part of emotional intelligence is what? Self-awareness, how to self-regulate, how to motivate, and empathy. Empathy does what? Anybody? What does empathy provide?
Understanding.
So we got another poll about empathy versus sympathy, the difference. How important is empathy? And we have a poll here. How important is empathy versus sympathy? Connection. Yes, Jody, absolutely right. It's that connection piece. Last poll, I do believe. There we go. Rate the importance of empathy versus sympathy to connectedness and belonging. Understanding, yes, Catalina. We got about 34 seconds. Okay, I'm going to end poll. Everybody voted. Very important. Very important. Thank you for that, you guys. So let's see this video about empathy versus sympathy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy: perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth, staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do, recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So just really quickly to reflect, you guys, and interact. Oh, did anyone have a question on that? Just a group discussion among each other, all of us, is dive a little deeper. How do you show empathy? When empathy is shown to you versus sympathy, what is your emotional response? Or what happens when you give empathy?
I'd like to say something. To give empathy is like knowing their story. Like my mom used to always tell me, like, listen, Catalina, everyone bleed. We're all human. It's understanding we all make mistakes, but it's not the end of the world. And we need to let our students know and our coworkers, whoever we're working with, and collaborate, and just saying like, oh, okay, it's gonna be all right, but I understand. But we could work through this together, not just closing out people or closing out people's story, especially little kids in the K to 12, even at the college level. Like, we all work, we all have kids, or whoever have kids, or who is a mother, I'm a mother. Like, you have to empathize and understand, like, this is what humans do. We talk, we collaborate. None talking is, I don't know, that's another system, but I'm just saying, just understanding that person's story and let them know that it's okay, that we could all work on this together. But when we don't empathize, it's another situation, and it causes chaos, and we see it every day on the news, and we feed on that, but we try to tell our kids, don't do that. It's something better that you can do, and especially with these 21st century kids, especially my daughter, nieces, and nephews, they into the gaming, and that could take control of them. Be like, okay, listen, go outside, let's play some basketball. Like, don't tell them like you can go play, just go with them. Emphasize like, oh, did you know you could do this? That's with empathizing and showing emotion. And then by us being human, we are able, and especially different, like my mom, she's more wiser than me since she's older. She would tell, oh no, Kathleen, you did that wrong. Oh, how should I do it, Mom? But just empathize, making people understand and feeling like it's okay.
Catalina, thank you. And yes, you're right, Leanna. Thank you for sharing empathy and the difference. Leanna, you wanted to share too?
Yeah, just quickly, I wanted to say that when it comes to empathy, the way that I've always described it, and I really think that this video did a beautiful job at it, is empathy takes a shift in your perspective. It's not, feeling sorry for someone and saying, man, that's awful. I'm so sorry. But it's shifting your perspective and trying to see the situation from their point of view and really putting yourself in their shoes. And I think that that is what really is going to get you a deeper understanding. And I love that the video showed, the bear going down to where the fox was, instead of trying to just view the situation from the outside and saying like, oh man, like you're down there, like that is an awful situation that you're in. But the bear went down and was there with the fox and was like, you know what? Hey, I've been there. I loved that statement. I've been there. I know what you're going through, or I can at least put myself in this position to try to see what you're going through and have that connection down on the same level.
Fantastic. And Jody says, when someone shares something, it is not an invitation for you to share your similar experience, and listen and affirm. And Elvia says, yes, everyone feeling should be validated. And Renee, I'll get to you. I wanted to share, like, one of the things I love about that video is one of my favorite, and I highly recommend. Brene Brown does such a fascinating on many other things, is the bear also says, basically, even when I don't understand, right, I'm here for you. And that's extremely important, because empathy doesn't require you to be able to understand as well, right? It's really that, like Catalina said and Jody said, it's that connection. So we need to do that, you as teachers in your classroom, but also with your peers, right? Because that's also how change happens. But also institutionally, and I always kind of describe this, when I step foot on the institution as a parent or teacher, and I don't work here, how do we create that connection and sense of belonging? Because as soon as you could be an educator and teacher in a classroom, and as soon as that student, because I've heard this, steps outside that classroom, they're disconnected. When I said at the beginning, how do I keep you engaged? How do I keep you feeling this way? Because it's also keeping me engaged. And hopefully, what we've experienced together in almost these 2.5 hours, you have 10 minutes left, that's there and you were engaged. And empathizing with others helps you to learn to regulate your own emotions even more so, right? And when you do that, you're not devaluing people. You're not automatically going into thinking about, oh, I have a certain way that I'm thinking about this person, which is our biases, right? And whether you're in that state, you're not in a response, you're in the state of valuing and the worthiness of Catalina, Renee, Michelle, Leanna, I think it's Shalia, Jody, and whoever else on here. That's what I'm saying, worthy. You're in that state of value. And Renee, go ahead.
I was thinking about like a couple things. Like, I think sometimes our human nature, especially as educators, is we want to fix things. And so I think that we think that when we sympathize with somebody, that somehow we're fixing it and making it better. And I think about my own personal experience with sympathy. And sometimes when people have sympathized with me, it actually doesn't help me to feel better. Sometimes it helps me to feel weaker or worse or like pathetic or like just not always in a better space. So I was thinking about the idea of like empathy, and like I have my teenagers that live with me, and so I try to fix stuff with them, which is not always a good strategy. And so recently, one of my kids was complaining about something, and I just said, "Oh man, that sucks." And that's all I said. That sucks. And they're like, yeah, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden they were more open to tell me more. And I was like, I didn't fix it. All I did was acknowledge what they were saying, and in a sense, in their terminology, because I don't usually say that sucks, you know what I mean? But it resonated and it opened another door. And I think that's what empathy versus sympathy does. It hits us differently. It feels better.
I appreciate that. And you said something that made me think of, like, we have to get to, it's okay to let your guard down, right? Empathy is also that vulnerability. And I know with sympathy, it made me think of an example of I am a mom and I have a son who's 30. But as I was raising him, a lot of times people would, oh, you're a single parent. And I'm being honest with you, it really would get on my nerves that how they approach, because it's like a sympathetic, like, and that's another reason why I'm an ally. I'm not an ally, I'm a co-conspirator about this, because you cannot think of students in this way, right? You shouldn't be thinking of a person like, oh, your life, right? We haven't even had a conversation. You're already giving me that, like, that vibe, and that's wrong. That is wrong. I haven't said that it sucks being a single parent, but that's the first reaction. So I'm going to use that as an example of when people, and we do it as a society. Oh, single parents. Oh, single mom. So I wanted to share that like that. And that single parent, single mom, if she's in education, she was a student at some point. We had heard many of you describe that. So let's move on. I know we have lots to talk about. We have 5 minutes, so I want to get through this. A couple more slides. We won't be able to do the breakout session. This is such a warmth, but it's a connection to show allowing vulnerability and humility. And Catalina touched on that with her mom was saying, and hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right, just correct me. Empathy is connecting through shared feelings and emotions. And so it goes both ways, right? Connectedness and belonging. So if I'm a student educator in mutual humanization, I talked about that being one of the points. It's mean I feel seen, I feel heard, understood. I feel a sense of belonging. And when I feel that way, I'm speaking parent, student, right? Parent, student, teacher. When I feel that way, then I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to share my lived experiences. I'm not going to have that facades, no longer have that facades up. Because the lens of humanizing education is defined teaching as a process and a vision for life in schools and beyond, not only for students, it's for you too, that growth. So how important is engagement? You can't have engagement without connectedness and belonging. I don't know how. We may engage real quickly, but if you don't connect for a little bit, I'm not going to feel like I belong. And belonging, let me assure you, is really like, I have to belong to myself. And part of me belonging to myself is also connecting with you because we're sharing something in exchange. So I'm going to end with, because we have 3 minutes, even though we have more, where are you right now? Because I asked that at the beginning. How are you connected and engaged? How can we end this session? Where are you right now? What are ways that you can create mutual humanization? You don't have to answer. I'll keep going. It's our lived experiences. It's our connections, our common lived experiences. Every single person I think today that shared something, I can totally connect, lived it. Because you shared your personal, shared something that your mom said, you shared something that you feel, you shared how you felt about politics. Wouldn't that be mutual humanization? What occurs when the instruction is the expression of consciousness of student and teacher? Does empathy spark compassion to be deliberate? Really sparks students and teachers being on a quest together. I can't get to this, but Paul Freire, 1970, he's the one that came up with Humanizing Pedagogy Experiences, and it's all about critical consciousness. And that critical consciousness, I'm going to just go back on my visual here. I think it was here, right? I may have skipped it. Critical consciousness. Where does that come from? It really comes from our emotional intelligence. How we perceive, manage, understand our emotions, and use our emotions. He explains that when you get to that commonality with your students and teacher, you become co-conspirators of learning, right? Of their educational, authentic learning experience, where you have this co-dialogue that we had today. We had a co-dialogue. Would anybody disagree? Of humanizing. A dialogue approach that steps goes into critical conscious, critical talking, a dialogue. We're no longer at the state of dehumanization of each other or devaluing, because dehumanization is totally devaluing others. And we would have done a breakout session, but we're unable to do
10
that.
concepts about Paulo Freire's.
But I do want to leave you with this. For us to commit to increasing equity and excellence in education of culturally and linguistically diverse students, we must teach against the grain of dehumanizing practices and policies. Leaving you today using your I feel connected to my learning experience because instructors, counselors, and peers, what? I do not feel connected to my learning experience. But you can speak this as an educator because you're learning from your students. I just want to tell you guys thank you. Thank you for being in this space. I said I was a hiker at the very beginning, and I am. This is my dog. He's a multi-poodle. And he goes on a lot of the hikes, not all. He didn't go to, I just got him actually from the very first picture that you saw. I picked him up once I returned from my trip. So he is only 16 months. Now he is 16 months. And he loves hiking, hiking with me. And so I want to end with that, a little personal note of what I love and what I like to do. And if you want, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always, the information that you have now, that is absolutely what my LinkedIn account is about. It's uplifting, speaking up. And that's my email address. If you just want to drop me, that's my personal email address, not my work email address. Drop me an email and you want to learn more, you want to discuss more, or you want to just talk about something that's going on with you and how do you handle it. Thank you so much for being here with me. Oh, you guys are welcome.
Thank you, Tonette. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. What a great way to kind of, I mean, I know it's not Friday yet, but for some, we're getting close to the weekend here. And it's a really great message as we, wrap up this week.